remembered the note about mic discipline from the last episode. I know when I want to guffaw or chortle or otherwise
You want to
bust a gut, I got to move away.
If you're busting gut, yes, 100%. Yeah, that was Jake was really self-conscious about that. That was kind of funny.
He's a professional, man.
He is a professional in a lot of ways. Some ways not, but in a lot of ways, yes.
In the important ways. The ways that matter.
The ways of man. So, what's new?
Just ready to spend. I'm thankful, honestly, that I get to be in South Bend for the next 2 months.
Yeah.
Just be kind of doing the daily grind because I know myself well enough to know that I need to have kind of a set routine to actually thrive. Because when I'm traveling or doing something, I just kind of go haywire, and so
because you're going to Europe and I don't know. Well, not Europe. You're going to an island off of Europe.
I was gonna say this is contentious.
Yeah, you're going to an island off of Europe here pretty soon.
Many opinions. Well, part of that island could be Europe in a few years, and part of it not. So it'll be like the Schrodinger's cat.
It's just weirdly enough, the part of Europe, the part of the island that's furthest away from Europe is going to be the European portion.
Exactly. That's just kind of, they have a long history of that too. The Odd Alliance, they're just trying to be true to themselves. No, yeah, I'm at the end of July, I'm going to World Youth Day with a friend. And
you can say the friend.
Jimmy McGrath, an Monomaniacs friend, and then father Satish, another, man known to us. And then I'm back for a week to kind of get my affairs in order. And then I'm in the non-European part of a partially European island known as England.
So you're going to be in London proper too.
Yeah, I'll be living in Waterloo.
Okay.
For all you London heads, it's the major station, and then I'll be teaching at the Notre Dame campus, which is by Trafalgar Square and the National Galleries. So, pretty nice. And then there's a distinction between London and United Kingdom too, because London's very much a world into itself. Yeah. And I'd like to explore. Like I have a friend from Liverpool who I'd like to go potentially see where he's from. But otherwise, they're from August till I'll be back in December.
Jeez. That's a long time. Because, actually it's strange because as an American expatriate, I feel like the last place you should be is London. Like American expatriates, they go to Paris.
Exactly.
To write their best work. They don't go to London.
I write the essay. I live above the cafe.
Yes.
Have an affair or have partners of multiple sexes. But
in London, you just drink a lot, I guess.
Exactly.
You go to the pub, you eat a lot of pies.
Yeah, and talk about scrums.
Yeah.
But no, I lived in Rome for a month last summer, and that was honestly really hard. Yeah. The 10-day trips, 10 days kind of the sweet spot, or 2 weeks, because by the end you're ready to go home, but you don't feel completely burnt out or truly homesick. But being in Rome, once I entered into week 3, especially because my Italian sucks. Like I can read Italian well, but I cannot speak it to save my life.
Well, how's your British English?
I'm very conscious of how I spell flavor and honor and other things. Saying and 100 instead of 100.
Oh.
But Mark Kaltoff had me do that anyway at Hillsdale too. So, but I think, and so it was a little hard adjusting there. And I was also by myself. I was in London, not just a language barrier, but also I'll be living, I'll be on the same floor. Notre Dame's supplying my apartment. I'll be in kind of the student housing, but on a floor with especially law students and other grad students. And so even though I'll have my own studio, which is very nice, there'll be a little bit more of a community. There's a chapel there. And I think it'll be a little bit more familiar. And also just a little bit more purpose driven. I was doing my own research, but still I'm I kind of just doing whatever I want. Like having students that I'm accountable to each week actually will be really nice. So,
well, so you think you're going to prefer it, even though it's going to be in an objectively worse country.
Objectively worse food, objectively better Indian food. I mean,
that's true.
I think it'll be more comfortable, even though it's not as enjoyable to be there. Because Italy is great when you have a guide or with a group or something. You're with someone who knows the place.
Yeah.
When you're by yourself, it can be a little overwhelming. I eventually, by the end of it, I did enjoy being there, and I was a little sad to go. But I think I'm expecting England to be what we always characterize England to be: dependable, not particularly great, but dependable. Damn it.
You're gonna be able to get the same meal anywhere that you go. Right?
Exactly. The same gross, overcooked fish and the same ale.
When I was in Britain and I went to a chippy for the first time, I was like, wow. This sucks. This is worse than American fish and chips, 100%. I'm surprised that they consider this a staple.
No, I saw this great Reddit thread the other day. They were talking about British Chinese food.
Yeah.
And you'd think...
that became viral on Twitter as well.
It did?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But this gross sauce that was just kind of, I almost said drooled, but dripped over the thing of questionable variety. And this is this is Chinese food.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, I mean, we have bastardized Chinese food, but our bastardized Chinese food
it's
is
a genre to itself.
it's much better than their bastardized Chinese
I
food.
had genuine Szechuan cuisine for like the first time a few months ago. And like when you have like those handful of noodles and like the spice, just like it's completely different. I still appreciate American Chinese food, but it's a genre to itself. Whereas I think, English food, it's the...
It felt like taking American Chinese and putting it through a sieve. And like only taking the worst parts of American Chinese. Just the terrible fried chickens. And then they were like, oh, but then let's put peas on it, huh? Let's put chips with it. Let's put chips
that's what we do. That's what we do.
Always got chips with absolutely everything. Yeah, I follow a British Twitter account called like Britain Out of Context or whatever. And they post like all sorts of like, oh, tag your favorite this, like how do you get your chips? And it's like just fries and it's like with gravy on it. I'm like, okay, with mush peas. And I'm like, what? Curry sauce? I'm like, maybe, it gets a little out of control.
And they have the prawn flavored trip too. It's the prawn. I guess what they mean by cocktails, which doesn't even sound appetizing. It's a chip flavor on its own.
Well, so I'm not talking about chips as in
Oh, you mean like fries? Fries, yeah. With the gravy. The gravy's like poutine, though, right? Canadians kind of do that.
Yeah, well, so when I went, our guide got, because we had a guide in Britain. I don't know why you would need one, but we had one. She got it with mush peas, and I was like, how could you possibly? How is that tasty? How is that even remotely edible, even? Because they don't even salt things. So it's like just flavorless pea mush. I don't know. It's silly to me.
No, I mean, maybe that's the long kind of ingrained, idea of wartime rationing, where we're just kind of accustomed to our food, eating bad food. We're doing it for a greater cause or something, Well, if you like the NHS, you got to eat your pea mush.
Yeah, you got to have to have a toast sandwich. Are you familiar with the toast sandwich?
No.
It's a staple of British cuisine. You have a sandwich in which the middle, it's 3 pieces of bread in which the middle piece is toasted.
That's some Great Depression style stuff there.
Yeah, it's like either that or putting dirt in your mouth.
Exactly.
One or the other.
Which one do you want? Well, I was just talking to Becca a little while ago about London. She was talking to me about us staying in London, and that brought me back to you talking about a former episode about travels and hotels. Yeah. And a few months ago, I was in Montreal, and I had the same place where I had the good Chinese food. I stayed in a kind of nicer hotel, and exactly what you said. There's always something weird going on with the shower. The shower, like, it was kind of like jutting out into the middle of the room with a pretty translucent but slightly blurred glass window. I thought, what the hell is up with that? And then a few weeks later, I listened to that episode, and I'm like, that's so true. There's always something weird going on.
A nice hotel room is a place that they prepare for you to cheat on your wife at. That's
exactly
all that it is. It's very ridiculous.
Every room is the sex suite. But I was with a few other guys. We were just kind of sharing the hotel room. We were all offended by it. We're like, okay, be on your phone while I'm taking a shower, because you could slide that door across too. So there was nothing between you and the audience functionally. So, but I was like, I'm fine.
You go down to the front desk. You said, "You guys have popcorn? You guys have popcorn here? I was wondering if we could buy popcorn."
Exactly. I don't want a kit. I don't want other devices. I just want the planters. So.
Yes. Well, I was saying this so that they could observe.
Oh, I see. Exactly. I see. Like in-flight entertainment. Yeah. Have you been to the movies recently?
Mm-mm.
I was just talking to some of this yesterday. I think
nowhere near the
accoutrements, the recliners, and everything. Even there've been movies out that I want to go see, but I still can't get myself to go.
I'll go back to the theater for like Dune 2.
Yeah. What about Dial of Destiny?
Dial of Destiny? Definitely not Dial of Destiny. I don't know.
Come on.
I feel like with Dial of Destiny, there's a lot of misinformation online about how bad it is.
I think so too.
People are like making up screenshots and whatnot for it, but I mean, the clips that do exist are pretty.
Yeah, I think a screenshot that was fabricated was the the indigenous peoples.
Yeah. I fought the Nazis. Well, you also stole from indigenous peoples.
Right. But the fragments, I mean, that do kind of sound believable, especially based off of like saying the clips you can piece together. You can kind of piece together a script, or we all know what the dial's going to do, or what these sorts of things do, and it. Because I mean, as much I don't know, we stand on Indiana Jones lore, but as bad, as subjectively bad in certain ways as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was, I think what it got right is that Indiana Jones is pulpy. It took the absurdity way too far, especially in the latter part. But you just kind of have to lean into the pulp. You have to lean into the ethnic stereotypes of all the people. I feel like this one, maybe they'll have the ethnic stereotypes, but then they'll subvert it. Like you have the girl who's going to be like kind of the smart character. undermining all of that, which is kind of what they do with all the nostalgia bait now any days. And so, I mean, I think maybe in the same way that the sequels kind of created nostalgia goggles for the prequels in the Star Wars world, maybe this will be like, oh, Crystal Skull was so good compared to Dial of Destiny.
Well, there's an open secret in Hollywood that the reshoots were because at the end of the movie, they killed Indiana Jones, and then the Fleabag lady became the new Indiana Jones.
Oh.
It was like a passing of the mantle.
Okay.
It was, Ray Skywalker moment.
Okay, yeah.
Ray.
I'm Ray Jones.
Yeah. Who are you? Ray Skywalker. Is Palpatine's last name Jones?
Oh no, I meant in terms of her adopting Indiana Jones. So it's all Sheev. Sheev Palpatine. Yeah.
Palpatine is the last name.
Palpatine's last name. Sheev is the first name.
Yes, I love Sheev. I love that name so much.
I don't know when that was inserted into the. It was after the prequels, I think.
Yeah.
It was, I think, randomly in some the visual dictionary of Star Wars.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it was dropped. We have a first name for the Emperor now. So.
Yeah, but it's going to be Ray Jones, I think, was what the initial ending was, and then that had a terrible test screening. So they're like, okay, we've
gone a bridge too far.
Yeah,
so I mean,
scrap that. Start from the start.
I mean, I doubt Harrison Ford, because I think they wanted to kill off Han Solo. I was following this Twitter thread the other day that was a deep dive into the Return of the Jedi making process, which was crazy, as they all kind of were. But I think they wanted to kill off Harrison Ford like within the first act of the movie to show, the stakes are high. Who knows who's going to die? Who knows will be bad now? But they didn't, and I think Harrison Ford objected to Han dying too. I don't know if he would care at this point. Actually, I just want money for my grandkids.
Well, the funny thing about him is that he famously is really defensive in all interviews about Han Solo, but he's super happy when he talks about Indiana Jones.
Right.
Like, he hates Han Solo. He loves Indiana Jones. He loves Deckard from Blade Runner. He loves all his characters except for Han Solo, which is funny because, I mean, I'm looking at Han Solo and Indiana Jones and I can't see much of a difference.
Yeah, it's like
he's not a super depthful actor.
No, it's like Johnny Depp, or even John Wayne. Quite honestly, like you're a certain guy and you just play yourself, and they turn the camera on and watch you do your thing.
I don't think you need to put a caveat on John Wayne. I think John Wayne is more of that than either of those two.
Totally, yeah. It was his career. Yeah,
but no, it's very funny. He's very, he's like, do not ever talk to me about Han Solo ever again.
Yeah, Alec Guinness was kind of like that too. I heard too that he famously hated Star Wars.
Yeah,
but I think he was the only actor who was able to negotiate in his contract that he got like a certain cut of like the profits or like he.
No, it wasn't. It was on merchandising.
Merchandising.
He was the only guy who asked for merchandising, and he made a ton of money.
So now his great grandkids are set from everything. So
yeah, it was like, the bridge over the River Kwai really wasn't bringing in the cash that I thought it would. We got to do a Star Wars flick. Right. Yeah, no, Alec Guinness definitely he made out like a bandit even more than a lot of the other people did. But yeah, I don't know, man. Harrison Ford is a funny. I don't know, because I watched. He's not Jack Ryan in. He's in which movies is he Jack Ryan? Because him and Alec Baldwin are the two.
Well, Jack Ryan's in Hunt for Red October, isn't he?
Yeah. But
isn't he Jack Ryan in that?
It's him, not is it him or Alec Baldwin?
I thought it was Harrison Ford.
I'm pretty sure. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's Harrison Ford.
I mean, there's a slate of '90s movies where he plays some sort of federal agent.
Yeah,
like you have Witness. Well, he's just a cop, and I think he's a cop from Philadelphia. And Witness,
The Fugitive, but he's a doctor in the Fugitive.
Air Force. Isn't he in Air Force One? Or
yes, I think he's the president in Air Force One.
Yeah.
I couldn't make it through The Fugitive.
Really?
It's a Monomaniacs. We have to talk about watching movies on a plane. I attempted to watch it on a plane. I couldn't make it through. I don't know. I made it 15 minutes in, and I was like, I'm not really feeling it. So
wow. That was me with Beverly Hills Cop. I couldn't
after the fifth time it was like bump 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 bump. You're like, okay,
totally. I'm like, this is over, Eddie Murphy. You're not kind of going hard enough for me. We need the Eddie Murphy raw back.
Well, I feel like every time back then, the movies were a lot more slow paced, even the comic ones, right? I don't know if you've ever seen Fletch before.
Oh yeah.
Chevy Chase. That's a very slow movie.
Yeah.
Also, debatably not a very funny.
No,
movie.
It wasn't. The people I was watching Fletch with were and it was some older, it was some kids, their parents. The parents were howling at Fletch. It just wasn't doing it. There was a joke or two that landed, but it was just kind of. I don't find Chevy Chase to be that funny.
Well, that reminds me when you and I watched Caddyshack.
Right.
I was like, this sucks. Yeah. And who were we watching it with? Who was loving it? Was it Brant?
I think it was Brant and Jimmy and. Was Isaac there? I think Isaac.
Maybe.
Yeah, Isaac was there.
Yeah, but they're all like, "Oh, this is great. I love this." And I was like, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen." I could not handle it.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm sure that people will be looking back at our great comic films like
Hot Tub Time Machine.
Yeah, I don't think our generation has great comic films.
Well, they don't make the dumb comedy like Hot Tub Time Machine anymore.
No,
those are gone.
They don't make dumb comedies anymore. I guess there's some on like television and stuff, like The Righteous Gemstones and stuff like that. But
or even rom-coms. Or I do see rom-coms. Like there was the George Clooney, George Clooney, Julia Roberts, or whoever it was. But there was like Paradise Island or something that came out. There was the Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum had one. I watched that on a plane. But it felt like, okay, run of your male romantic comedy, like You've Got Mail or that sort of thing. So they are still making those. But in terms of like the dumb comedy, they kind of trailed off.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I'm just wondering if maybe a lot of those guys are still making movies, but they're making serious movies now. Like Jonah Hill's making movies about a psychiatrist,
Yeah, or like how, is it Jordan Peele? He was making horror movies, serious movies now. So Keegan Michael Key's just still running around doing.
He's
stuff,
like, I'm playing Toad in the new Mario movie, and it's like, definitely not winning any Oscars like my partner.
I'll happily ride Illumination's coattails though to make another a quick check. So
you excited for the Mario movie too?
I'm more interested.
Wait, did you see the Mario movie?
I didn't see the Mario movie.
I feel like it's a running joke at this point now where we talk about the Mario movie.
Every episode.
Nobody's ever talked about the Mario movie or seen the Mario movie.
The Mario movie existed for me in my mind, in that I needed the Mario movie to do well if I ever get a Legend of Zelda movie.
Yes.
Which actually, maybe Legend of Zelda, I think, maybe it's a desire that my heart wants, but actually it's really a dumb idea because if you think about it, the game doesn't really lend itself well to a movie format.
I think they've said that there is an intention to make a Legend of Zelda film and a Metroid film. Those are the next two kind of on the chopping block.
But I mean, the Metroid film, people are just gonna be like, "Isn't this Alien?"
Yeah.
Like, didn't we already see this? But
I'm pretty excited for the Super Smash Bros. Avengers film.
Oh, like the team up movie that's meant to bring the Illumination cinematic universe together.
Yes, it's going to be Super Smash Bros. It's going to come out in 2035 or whatever.
But will the Minions be part of that movie too? So because they're part of the Illumination verse.
Oh, they'll make an appearance, I'm sure.
Is Sing Illumination too?
Yes.
I want to say that's some independence. I could be wrong though.
I'm pretty sure Sing is.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's devoid of any sort of creativity, so it makes sense.
Someone was talking to me the other day. They're like, you don't understand. Like in Zootopia, it matters that they're animals. In Sing, it doesn't matter that they're animals. And they were very insistent. This is because there's a big kind of crowd of Zootopia stands out there too. Like this is the seminal film, not just furries. I mean, people are like, this is such a great critique of our society, or it's satire. It's like almost as good as Bright.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so that's the problem with movies like that. I hate like racial allegories that are based off of reality, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, we live in a society of predators and prey. Mm-hmm. Okay, so a hierarchy exists there. We're talking about one group that almost certainly is evolutionarily oriented around killing the other.
Right.
And it's like, man, isn't it like so sad that they think this way about them? Like it's not like human beings. Human beings are just human beings. We're people, right?
If we're trying to make an allegory about race and say, okay, it's illegitimate for people to discriminate or draw these lines because of race, because race is ultimately ephemeral. What artistic device are we going to use to draw this lesson? Yeah. We're going to use animals who are wired by nature, which is kind of an amoral realm, and are designed to eat one another or else they die.
Well, so there's actually
for that topic.
Have you heard about the Disney Channel's attempt at this, the racial allegory?
No.
ZOMBIES. Zombies?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so it's very bad. There's like 3 of them, I think, at this point. But it's about a society where it's a town where there's a zombie outbreak. And then the zombies like eat people. And then somebody discovers a piece of technology. It's like a computer that all of them wear on their wrists that make them normal. But then they apartheid them. And they put them in this, walled part of the city. And they can only live in the walled part of the city. And they all have these computers on their wrists that make it so that they're just normal people with green hair. That's the thing about them. They have green hair. Right. And they all live in this apartheid state. And then the story begins with the first year of integrated high school, where the zombies and the normals get to like go to high school together. Right. But, it falls apart on its face because, first off, they ate and killed people. And second off, they have to have a computer. Like there's a piece of equipment that allows them to be normal. But
Right.
and then there's multiple points in the story where they break, and the first thing they think is like, oh, I want to eat another person, and then they try to eat people, right? And you're like, okay, this falls apart as a racial allegory because then there's people who are like making really heavy emphasis on it being a racial allegory. Like there's a character who's, she's like the young black coded character,
Right.
and she's like has all this revolutionary talk where like zombies need to rise up, like zombies
Right.
they need, we need to like fight for ourselves in this culture and bring ourselves to equality here. It's like your option of rising up is you eating everybody. You to live an authentic zombie experience is to be a monster, right?
And then the non-zombie will say, I'll defeat you when you rise up, but no one will say that you weren't a man, zombie. Because you rose up.
Yeah, it's very it falls apart. It's very silly in my mind. When I read like somebody does a racial allegory that isn't, because Bright's a good example where it's like, what if black people were monster orcs with tusks? And it's like, whoa, okay, all right.
Yeah, you're leaning very hard into what you're trying to combat there. No, yeah, you even have the zombie. You have the zombie ghetto or the zombie, the red line zombie district.
Yeah,
so I hadn't heard of that. I mean, I know Disney was very much kind of in the business now of. Like, and I know the Proud Family reboot, like they had an episode like they do the sketch where they talk about reparations or 1619 or whatever. So
yeah, well, and like I feel like that's a far more acceptable.
It actually makes sense.
It's
a show about a black family,
being like, oh, these zombies are an allegory for black people. It's
right.
Like, okay, well, what do they have in common with black people? Oh, well, they're downtrodden. Okay, I can agree with that. But what else do they have in common? Nothing, but they also eat people. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the question of whenever you're trying to use fantasy to be representative of something. It's like, well, you think, okay, fantasy frees me from the limitations of the world, and I can just kind of experiment in this abstract space. Like, no, like people are always going to be searching for reference, and even if you are like. You do want people to understand that you are trying to draw analogies. So like, okay, well, the devil's in the details, and like you're still doing this. So what's the implication here?
Yeah.
Are you saying that in spite of people being fundamentally monsters, we should still accept them nonetheless? But they are monsters, but you should still accept them.
Yeah,
so.
This is like the people who claim that like there's racial equivalence in fantasy works, like in Tolkien.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, the orcs, they're supposed to be black people. Or it's like, how do you feel about black people to think that they're the orcs in this scenario?
Right.
I don't know. It's very ridiculous, right? Where it's like, there's a claim that you shouldn't have any sort of representation that's barbaric in any sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, well, okay, that puts a little bit too much weight on actual reality there.
Yeah, or like having the subaltern, or the other, like from the Haradrim's perspective, the Gondorians are barbarians, or I just finished actually reading the Silmarillion. Those books are always like, oh, you must read the Silmarillion, having read it, and it's a slog in many parts. But I was reading about it and like looking things up. I ran into more of these questions about, you have the dark men, or you have the dark elves, or you have the men of the south, or why is it that the bad guys in Tolkien are always from the east or from the south? But I mean, that just kind of ignores like some of the principal, creators of chaos and Silmarillion are elves who lived in the Undying Lands, who are just proud, or like the chosen men, like the men of the West, are the ones who cause functionally God in that world to take the earth from being flat to making it round, and he drowns the island. So it's much, obviously. I mean, there are, and as he designed it to kind of be like, this is like the mythos of.
That's what I was going to say. It's supposed to be a monomyth about the European culture, right?
Yeah,
it's supposed to be a Christianized
kind of based off of this Finnish epic and kind of all these different things. But I'm saying even in that, if you do want to say, okay, the other that is south or east is still bad. Okay, fair enough. But I mean an essential point of the work is just the corruptibility of every single person, even the most heroic. Yeah. And so it's all facile.
Yeah, I was checking back through my Audible because I share Audible with like a bunch of family members, and was trying to find something to listen to. So I listened to Out of the Silent Planet, which some people are very adamant about as a great work. I don't know if I'd say that. For those who don't know, this is the first of the 3 C.S. Lewis sci-fi trilogy, the space trilogy. It was, how like I've said this on the show before, but sci-fi is incredibly didactic,
right?
And like a lot of people are like, oh man, it's insane how didactic Narnia is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, imagine if he had no cap on how didactic he could be. And that's just Out of the Silent Planet. or the sequel, which I'm like a third of the way through, Peleandra, where it's like, okay, my character is going to go from place to place and be instructed by multiple sages who are just going to tell him the way it is. And he just moves from sage to sage to sage, right? Where it's more of a polemic than it is an actual narrative. In any real way.
No, Lewis's fiction has never. I mean, I do love kind of his short books on Christianity and his essays. He also actually my favorite Lewis writings. He's written a book called I think it's called English Language in the 16th Century or something. But his works of actually scholarship on English, and the development of English literature are honestly very insightful. But when it comes to his high fantasy, they don't really do it for me. I don't. I mean, they're fine. I think the Narnia books are fine kids books, but I don't. And I mean, I'm to be honest, like I am kind of not the people who are like, oh, children's literature, like these are the deepest books out there. I'm like, I don't necessarily buy that. But even there, like the Narnia books, like there are truths and there's good lessons in here, but it's not like in my limited reading time that I have now, I'm not kind of interested right now in going back to Narnia just yet.
He's a talented prose writer. And
totally,
there's like some really good imagery and some good moments, right? Mm-hmm. But you're right, you're reading and you're like, I get it, right? Because the whole point of the first book is that it's him exploring a world that's unaffected by the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so it's just him being like, "Isn't this just the perfect society?" And you're like, "Okay," it's like utopia, in that it's not right. It's polemical. It's like, okay, we're just describing a thing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, honestly. Are
you just reading it out of? I should read this.
Yeah, well, I just have it on Audible, so I was just
Audible.
I had to do a bunch of. I had to. We got new carpet in our upstairs, so I had to move everything from upstairs to downstairs. So, and then from downstairs to upstairs. So I was like, well, what do I do? It's like, oh, I guess I'll listen to Out of the Silent Planet. But I mean, there's like 3 plot things that happen in the whole book. There's like a beginning, middle, and end, and that's literally it. That's the only plot that occurs. The rest is him just hanging out and being told, like, man, isn't it crazy that humans kill humans? We don't do that here. And you're like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Listen, dear reader.
Yeah.
It's like in Uncle Tom's Cabin where it's like, imagine, dear reader, their terror as they jumped from flow to flow. I mean, Yeah, it was, I would say it was very uncompelling. I can understand why some people love it, but not for the reasons. Well, I think you and I resonate on certain things. I was thinking yesterday, I was hanging out with a friend in South Bend who, it's in terms of things that some people are really beloved to some people, but I think are objectively have problems. Like he's just obsessed with The Hidden Life, and he has seen it like 15 times.
Oh yeah.
And like every kind of talk, like he just springs up, and I love it. It's really meaningful to him, but like I'm afraid to tell him that because I watched it with him, and I was like, okay. I just I don't really enjoy Terrence Malick films that much.
I mean, I walked into that film and I was like, it was okay.
Yeah, I was fine, but I didn't think that the moral drama of this guy, like, I think I've seen similar kind of situations of like questions of conscience that are, it kind of provoked an interesting question, like, okay, is this guy, if he's just doing this out of moral principle, it's kind of like how A Man for All Seasons was written by the playwright wasn't Christian.
Yeah.
This Franz's decision makes sense only if there is a God. Like if there isn't a God, like is he just, abusing his family, even though he's doing it out of personal conviction. So there was an interesting conversation, but as the movie overall, I'm like, it was okay. I just find with Malick films, like it's just so self-consciously, like I am being so artistic. And like, doing this, like
my big issue with it is that I felt like it was deist.
Okay, yeah.
Like it, I don't know. It was very much the world as a cathedral. Mm-hmm. Was its emphasis.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't know necessarily if his actions were justified in a world in which the world is a cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Potentially, in a specific moral framework of his conviction related to his faith.
Right.
Not necessarily to this general, like there's very little discussion about where he's getting his conviction from.
Right. Like there's like a scene where he's like talking to a painter in the church, but in terms of like, and I think if you actually read his letters, like with his wife, he talks about Christianity quite a lot.
Yeah.
And his faith for that reason. But it's in the movie, like it's very much just like, this is what must be done, or this is right. And like, I have no other option, or.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I didn't particularly like it. But like you, I was just sort of silently nodding along to a group of like 6 people being like, this is the greatest thing that's ever been made. And I was like, all right.
Like, I don't want to rock the boat. You know, just let it go. I can maintain my
Glad
peace.
everybody feels that way. I wish I did. I wish I felt that way.
Believe you have no idea how badly I wanted to be moved by this. You have no idea the cross I must bear.
Yes. The after the 5th time,
I must live my own hidden life.
Yeah. My hidden life is admitting that I don't really like a hidden life. All right. So the show is ostensibly about something. So Dylan, I'm sure, is going to complain that during the Jake Conrad episode, I didn't do this. So this is Monomaniacs. Although I think this is technically a Brain Trust episode since Dylan isn't here. He's going to be back later tonight, but Sammy was in town, so I thought it'd be a good idea to hit a record on this one. But it's about kind of delving into somebody's current obsession. And usually somebody brings something, but I talked to Sammy before the show, and I thought, well, he just got back from the Holy Land.
Yep.
So I think it'd be cool if we had a conversation about Israel.
Israel and the Palestinian territories.
Zion itself. The Levant.
Exactly. The British mandate.
The British mandate Palestine. Are those sandals, did you wear those in the Levant?
They are. They have holy dust on them. And more importantly, I wore them on the flight back. And so they had like 36 hours of Holy Land sweat and dust. But I had worn them that same day on the Mount of the Transfiguration.
Well, there we go. You should clap those together and shake them into this room. I'm sure that it'll transfer some sort of...
Yeah, woe to you, Chorazim and Hillsdale.
Yes.
It'll be more tolerable for cold water on that day. Than
so for everybody at home who doesn't know, you've been to Israel multiple times.
Yeah, this is my sixth.
The sixth time in Israel. So I'm just curious sort of what you learned this time around, like what kind of impressions you've gotten, because I imagine, your interpretation of the place, let alone the political situation, has nuanced further and further every time that you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, just for a little bit of background for people who are probably wondering why I've been there so many times. So I went as a student at Hillsdale with a certain organization that takes kind of Christian college students on these trips where it's not your typical Holy Land pilgrimage. It combines visiting holy sites with also learning about Judaism and learning about the modern conflict in the Holy Land today. And so I did that. And then I fellowed, which is kind of interning them for a few trips, exactly 2. And then they wanted to build a Catholic initiative. How do we kind of articulate this trip for a Catholic audience? Because mostly the company was founded by evangelical Protestants, and they were kind of interested in expanding partners in the Catholic space. So I actually worked for them for a year out of college. But then I came to Notre Dame in 2020, where I've been for the past 3 years, but I stayed in contact with them. And most trips since then, since they started doing them again after the pandemic, I've been trip staff, which just means doing logistical work, making sure people have rooms at the hotels, have meals, introducing speakers, helping students if they're sick, working with different faculty on the itinerary for the day. But I work actually a lot with especially our Israeli tour partners on the ground to do stuff. So most of the time I spend now is just kind of people watching, kind of observing things. I have time on my own to I'll just go to a cafe in Jerusalem and something. So it actually allows me to be a lot more observational. In a certain sense, when you go the first time, you're like, oh, this is the sepulcher. This is where Jesus actually was. Like you go to the Mount of the Beatitudes, you're not paying attention to the fact that most of the Mount of the Beatitudes now is like a date farm, and there's a coffee shop and a gift shop and all kinds of stuff up there. But you're just so overwhelmed by the fact that, wow, actually this stuff, it has flesh and bones on it now. It's actually a real place. By this time, and I have to constantly be on my phone because there's like a group chat, and if there's any kind of emergency situation, I need to be aware. But yeah, there's just 1 or 2 moments like at different places. Something that always kind of, I think, would say strikes me in some spiritual way. But for the most part, I'm just people watching, just kind of talking to different locals, hanging out with people, just kind of getting their scope on the situation. So I still enjoy going, especially when you get paid to go. Yeah, they pay for my expenses, and I get paid a little bit of chunk of change for it. But there's definitely a shift in kind of what interests you and what you're on the lookout for. And I always find something new whenever I go.
So what about this time?
It was, the most interesting thing we were in Jerusalem at a controversial time because they had what was called Jerusalem Day, which celebrates the reunification of Jerusalem after the 6-Day War in, I think it was 1967.
Yeah.
And in which, for those of you who don't know, between 1948 and 1967, the old city of Jerusalem was under control of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And Jordan, I think Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, I might be forgetting some country, but they started a war against Israel in 67. And then it takes...
6-Day War or the 7-Day War?
I think a 6-day war, maybe. You got to end the war before Shabbat, right?
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, Israel beats them essentially in that time, but they reclaim the entirety of the old city of Jerusalem. And the Kingdom of Jordan still maintains the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque are at. And so actually Jordan you have to show your passport when you go in because you're technically going into Jordan.
Yeah.
But for the most part, Israel controls the old city and the area around it. And so Jerusalem Day is when they celebrate that. And they have a big march of flags of marching through, the Muslim quarter, doing all that stuff. So I made sure I'd stayed away from the old city.
I saw a video that came out about that.
Yeah. And
of that woman yelling at the... Have you seen this?
No. I mean, I saw videos of like some kind of ultra-Orthodox Jews like shoving Christian merchants and doing that sort of thing.
There's this guy or this lady who was screaming at somebody in the Muslim quarter about, Israel, Jewish country, that sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting because you notice there's kind of this certain alliance between when it comes to Israelis, like there's secular Israelis, there's what we call ultra-Orthodox, and then on the spectrum between them, there's kind of Jews of varying practice. Even it's not truly right to call secular Israelis like, oh, they're not Jewish. Everyone identifies as Jewish and believe in kind of practice in certain ways. But it's, especially as Western Christians, it's much more about, if you are a practicing Christian, you have a very specific catechetical knowledge of what you believe. For Jews, it's just kind of more about participating in these different practices. And it seems that sometimes even though kind of secular Israelis and ultra-Orthodox most times hate each other, the ultra-Orthodox don't want to serve in the military, that sort of thing. There can be sometimes this kind of buildup in machismo vis-a-vis like, this is our place, and get out of the way, Christians and Muslims. And you just kind of see it especially in the last 6 months. And I was kind of pay attention to these things, see what I noticed here.
Because there was the Supreme Court situation, and
they're trying to currently they're trying to turn the Mount of Olives into a national park, which means they, I think, take control of all of the Christian holy sites there, which really should not happen. But they're just there have been a lot of attacks on just different, especially Eastern Christian priests in the Old City recently, and the police's usual response is, oh, these are one-off attacks. It's not going to be just like an unwillingness to actually investigate these hate crimes. And I was walking with a friend around the Old City, and we had this overlook of the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley, like Garden of Gethsemane's on the other side, leads up to the Mount of Olives. And they had a little sign showing you all the different Christian, Jewish, Muslim stuff that was on there. And all the Christian stuff had been scratched out from the map. And it was, you just kind of see it in these subtle ways where like, there's just kind of, teenagers running around. The older people.
Do you think there's like a stronger emphasis on anti-Christian emphasis than there is on anti-Islam emphasis right now?
I think for, many Israelis, the Arabs, especially if you talk to Arabs in Israel, like there's solidarity. I think more Arab versus Jew solidarity than like Christian Muslim or Christians and Jews versus Muslim. Like I think it's very completely the case. Like I was actually if you want to talk about an interesting thing I found on this trip, we stayed at the Ramada Nazareth. But Nazareth is an Arab Israeli town. That means that it's almost entirely Arab by ethnicity, but it's in Israel, so it's not in Palestinian city. It's about 70% Muslim, 30% Christian today. And on the rooftop, they have a rooftop bar. I was sitting up there, and I was talking to this Arab kid. He's like 20. He works at this radio station that's on top of the hotel. He told me he wants to go to Germany, be a DJ. He sent me his Spotify profile, but I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, in Nazareth, there kind of is tension between Muslims and Christian Arabs. Because for the most part, like there's really kind of pan-Arab solidarity as they view against the Israeli state. Not necessarily against individual Israelis. Like he said, his mom is a lawyer and has several Israeli clients who he says are essentially like family to him. But like in terms of the conflict, he's like, oh, I completely, our brothers in Palestine and Gaza, at one point he picked his glass up and like there's students around and he goes, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I'm like, that's a great look for me as staff for the trip right now. But it was cool just picking his brain.
Was he drinking alcohol?
He was, yeah. He's a Muslim, but he's like, I believe in God, and I fast during Ramadan. He's like, I'm still gonna drink.
Yeah.
And so, but like that's what picking people like that's brains now, or like H bus that we kind of go with has a medic on it, and I like picking their brains, and they'll just kind of say crazy intense stuff too, like, oh, one state, Arabs should be second-class citizens. Like, that's not a good idea, especially since you're going to be the minority in this one state. And so,
as in they were Arabs and they were saying they were going to be,
this is an Israeli guard who's on our bus. So I kind of like just picking all these people's brains. And I told the Arab guy, I'm like, it's weird for me kind of having been here so much. And I have a lot of friends over there now, just knowing both Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, non-practicing Jews, like all these people, several of whom hate each other. But just kind of knowing each of them, it's an interesting situation, but I enjoy just getting to observe stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I can imagine It must be kind of intense because I know that there's this weird, in America, there's this weird subliminal messaging of murder. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, if you meet somebody who's an avowed communist, right?
Right.
And they're like, oh, I've met people before who are like, I'm a Maoist. And it's like, okay, so like as a landowner, you would kill me, right?
Right.
In an Orthodox interpretation, as a man who owns a home, I'm somebody who would be on the shooting block, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You would put me up against a wall. And they're like, whoa, no, not you, right? But I imagine that, it's a little bit more explicit when you're in Israel, right? When not that you're out of the fight, you don't have a dog in this show,
right?
Other than, of course, like hoping that you have access to the Christian holy sites.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine the things that they say are a little bit more like, the world that you're depicting right now is involving a lot of murder.
Right. And if you want kind of a good example of Hebron, which is a city in Palestine, and when people say Palestine too, might understand like it's called the Palestinian territories, and it's divided into 3 zones: zones A, B, and C. A is it's policed by the Palestinian Authority, which is the Palestinian government, maintained by them. Bethlehem's a good example of that. Bethlehem's just outside of Jerusalem. There's Area B, which is mixed Israeli-Palestinian security. And then C, I think is technically Palestinian territory, but the IDF is the predominant military force there.
Is that where a majority of the settlements are?
Yes, they're in C, kind of encroaching in. But Hebron, I think Hebron's technically B, where it's mixed. But Hebron, you might remember it from Genesis. That's where the tomb of the patriarchs is, the cave of Machpelah.
Yeah.
And it itself is divided between like a Jewish and a Muslim holy site. You can go into either one, but once you've gone into one, you can't go into the other one for the day. You have to wait. And so, but Hebron itself, it's like street by street. There's streets with like Israeli settlers on one side, and streets with Palestinian Arabs on the others. Like if you look at a map, political map, it's crazy today. Like Hebron, it's slowly, I think, being kind of absorbed into Israel, but like Hebron's traditionally a Palestinian city, and so it's very, it's kind of
isn't that like further complicated by the demographic structures? Because from what I've read, or at least in my impression, and this may be wrong, but the ultra Orthodox are those who are more Zionist in disposition, kind of willing to go to the settlements. They're having children at a much higher rate than the traditionally like Ashkenazis or folks who are, would consider like left secular Judaism.
Right. Well, the ultra Orthodox are really interesting because like the Haredim is what they call them. They were against the establishment of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Because Zionism, as it arose in the 19th century, was really like a secular Jewish movement. Like Theodor Herzl, he was in, I don't think he was from Germany. He wrote in German, but he's very much looking to the formation of the nation states. He's maybe we should get in on this.
Yeah.
And you have like kind of the first Jewish settlement movements too. What would have been the area of Palestine under the Ottomans in the late 19th century. But the Orthodox were not interested in that because they're like, it's not God will give us the land back when it's His time. We can't bring it about. But once the land is in Jewish hands, they're like, well, we'll come along. We'll come along for the ride. And so a lot of Orthodox moved to Israel, but they don't want to serve in the IDF. Like the men kind of insist we need to go to yeshiva, which is essentially Jewish seminary.
Yeah.
While the mothers have 8 kids and get online master's degrees and pay for the family, while the men go to yeshiva and smoke all day. But anyway, the Orthodox, but like it's weird because they will protest against the Israeli government. And you'll sometimes see Orthodox waving Palestinian flags. But then they'll also move into it's unclear exactly what they do. And there's this enthusiasm for Jewishness being there, but also this antagonism towards the Israeli state. And I think there are dissenting voices.
So what makes up the primary demographic of the Israeli right wing then?
So like Likud, which is Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu's party. I mean, the people who are voting for him are mostly ultra Orthodox. Okay. I mean, Israel. I mean,
but if they like have protest against the state itself, then why are they voting for like decidedly more nationalist governments?
It's complicated. It's complicated. I mean, there's different parties. I think there actually is an ultra-Orthodox party.
Yeah.
Israel's also unique in that it has a chief religious authority. There's a rabbi who kind of controls certain things. Like, for example, you can't get cremated in Israel. There's someone in Tel Aviv who, they wanted to be cremated. There's kind of a controversy over whether they'll be cremated or not because the rabbi has restrictions against that. And there's no gambling in Israel either.
But there's a chief rabbi in most major metropolitan areas, right?
Like this is a political authority, though. This isn't like Jonathan Sachs, who's the chief rabbi of London. Like this is a political position who the rabbi has political authority to control certain laws or control certain restrictions. So it's not just like
of what tradition is this rabbi?
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's ultra Orthodox right now too. Yeah. So I mean, again, like but they're not, I want to say the majority in the country, but they're going to be in 100 years, certainly. They're the ones having the most families. I mean, kind of more secular Israelis might have 1 or 2 kids. I saw a lot of families with kids, but always like 1 or 2. Whereas the Ultra-Orthodox have many families. And so I think they actually have their own party in parliament. But again, Israel's parliament works such that it has coalition governments. You have to have these coalitions put together. And so Likud is an easy partner because, well, and I think especially kind of younger ultra-Orthodox, even though they don't want to go into the IDF, are much more enthusiastic for the expansion, especially vis-a-vis, especially Christians and Muslims. And so, you got to make deals with people. And so Netanyahu is a convenient partner. Yeah. I didn't realize before I came that he was prime minister again, because last time I checked in on him was last year, and I thought, oh, he's going to prison. And I picked Wikipedia, and it's like the current prime minister, Netanyahu, he won't go away. So
Yeah, no, it's have you ever when I was in New York City, I would often go to restaurants, and there's a lot of course, there's a lot of Jews in New York, so you would just sit down, and I think on 2 separate occasions I was having lunch by myself, and there'd be just 2 New Yorkers talking in depth about the nuances of the Israeli political system. Like, do you think Bibi is getting back in power? And he's like, I don't know. I just have this conversation. You're like, oh, okay. Wow. It's sort of like how in Puerto Rico, have you heard about this? Puerto Ricans who live in New York can vote in the Puerto Rican national elections because a majority of the money in the Puerto Rican economy comes from expats.
Oh, wow.
So, it doesn't matter where you are, you can vote in the Puerto Rican elections as long as you're Puerto Rican,
it does kind of seem like the American Jews that I've known that even if they haven't gone to Israel, they've done the birthright trip, which if you don't know birthright, where you can go to Israel if you're Jewish American. It's kind of, even ones who are just kind of very secular Jews, it's kind of, it's like, oh, it's something to be interested in. What's going on with Israel now? Or you have the Israeli flag. There's 2, it's kind of unrelated, but there's these 2, it was kind of very, it's just kind of a perfect example of just kind of Jewish humor there are these 2 Jewish students at Notre Dame who are in the Medieval Institute, and they're practicing, they wear the little kippah, the little hat. But there's one student in the Medieval Institute, she's very strong personality, kind of domineering of certain things. And these 2 guys would come down to kind of the printer workstation, the first floor of the library, every single day at lunchtime without fail. And they would go, oh, can you believe what so-and-so did today? Oh, she did that? I can't believe it. You know what? Someone needs to do something. You know what? We should do something. We should do something about it. Finally, we're going to put our foot down and do it. And then they would never do it. They just come out each day and do it. Because if they were to actually do something, they wouldn't have anything to talk about anymore. So, it felt like something funny. Out of Seinfeld or something. But
I can imagine though, right now, from what I've seen news-wise, it's a very tense time.
Yeah, I mean, I thought for a second, I got there a few days before our students landed.
Yeah.
And there were still rockets kind of being fired, things that heated up with Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the name of the organization. So I had a bet with a guy that the students actually were going to land, and sure enough, they did. And there were all kinds of logistical nightmares that happened on the ground with the trip. So almost maybe it would have been better if we had just all gone home. But it was a little tense there, and so people thought that Jerusalem Day was going to be very violent. Or people were even worried that is there going to be a third Intifada, because obviously the holy city, or the old city, of Jerusalem it's kind of the perennial powder keg, right? Because you have the 3 holy sites there of these major religions. Yeah. Essentially, everyone just has to respect the other there, or else all hell will break loose. I think the first Intifada began with the Western Wall. And the Western Wall is one of the retaining walls of the Temple Mount. And so you have the Islamic holy sites on top, and then the Jews come to the base of it to pray. And I think the first Intifada began, there had been some political dispute behind it, but the actual violence started when you had people on top of the Temple Mount throwing rocks down onto Jews who were praying down at the Western Wall. And so the IDF went up there, and then that's when everything started. But it's always, whenever these conflicts happen, it's always something that starts in the old city, because the old city is the prize for everyone.
What's the prize? And also it's the proximity, I feel like you're forced to sort of armpits and elbows.
Yeah, from the perspective of the Palestinian government, East Jerusalem is the capital of the Palestinian territories. I think technically Ramallah or Nablus. Ramallah and Nablus, which are kind of the major Palestinian cities. Ramallah is functionally, I think, where the Palestinian government meets. Yeah. But East Jerusalem is considered the capital. The original agreement that the UN kind of cooked up for these 2 states was that Jerusalem would be essentially an international city. Yeah. Then Israel would have a slice.
And a 1980s Berlin sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so people have proposed, okay, maybe West Jerusalem is an Israeli capital, and then East Jerusalem be the Palestinian capital, and we can work it out. But I mean, if you're asking me, like, when was the best chance for a peace deal to be achieved? I think it was definitely in the 90s, actually, with like Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister.
Clinton got close.
Yes, with Yasser Arafat, and this is Netanyahu again at the time. Like, he claimed, because Rabin really kind of had Arafat where he wanted him, and Netanyahu was kind of really whipping people up. And he said he said Rabin does not care about Jewish lives. Yitzhak Rabin had been a general in every single war that Israel had fought to that point. So I think it was pretty farcical to say that he didn't care about Jewish lives. But then Rabin was shot in Tel Aviv by a far-right Israeli, and then Arafat walked away, and every kind of peace deal has been worse and worse for Palestinians since then, too. So I think, and Netanyahu's kind of responsible for that. Rabin's widow, certainly, like, she just went up to him and said, "You have my husband's blood on your hands," essentially. Leah Rabin, she was a very formidable lady.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I mean, and even Mahmoud Abbas, who is the Palestinian president, I mean, he's 87, I think. And Hamas is going to be the most popular political party. He's outstayed his presidential term by almost a decade. Like, just thinking, okay, the minute I go, a Hamas leader will be elected. So I mean, it's going to boil over something.
So how is he prevented the Hamas from taking
like there being a popular revolution? Well, think about it. I mean, the Palestinian Authority soldiers and the IDF cooperate to a massive extent in the West Bank. And, Abbas will go before the United Nations and kind of always the thing, we need to end the occupation, do all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what's expected. But functionally on the ground, the IDF and the Palestinian Authority soldiers have to work together. And they're essentially forcibly preventing, Hamas. Hamas only controls Gaza. So Israeli withdrew from Gaza 2004, 2005. And Fatah, which is Abbas's party, which is kind of the ruling party because of him and the Palestinian Authority, their members, gosh, chuckle, their members, when Gaza was kind of blockaded by both Israel and Egypt, there was a revolution in Gaza. It was called the Gazan Civil War, and Hamas threw all the Fatah party members off the rooftops or like tied them to the back of cars and just drove them through the city to death. And so like Gaza is the only kind of area that Hamas directly controls. But after Abbas dies, and if they actually do have elections, he doesn't just forcibly instate a Fatah supporter, a Hamas leader will be elected. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there at that point. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you just had a massive IDF push into like, okay, we can't let this happen. And
I can imagine there would be a regime change.
Yeah, potentially. But then you have the problem again, where if we do essentially, okay, maybe we're two-state, this is just a noble lie we've been telling ourselves to just, keep trundling along as far as we can. Yeah. If you do want to go, balls to the wall, have that one state, well, guess what? The Jewish state's going to have a minority of Jews. That's just the fact on the ground. And so what do you do in that political situation? Do you say, okay, we have political rights for some and not others? That's going to be untenable. If you have political rights for everyone, then, the majority of people in the country will be electing a Hamas government for Israel. And so it's, but like you are kind of reaching a tipping point in years. So.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned from the Habsburgs in this sort of scenario.
How so?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like as far as longevity of a minority ethnic group ruling a diverse group of people in which there was majorities, Hungarians over Austrians, that sort of thing, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there was just this real strong emphasis on subsidiarity. Mm-hmm. Right, which I don't think is something that the Israeli government would be super comfortable with. But if they wanted to maintain control as minority, then they would have to do something along those lines. It'd have to be an empire. It can't be a representative government in any real form, because if it's a representative government in any real form, that means they get supplanted.
Well, Israel has the central problem, and you have like these debates among integralists. What does it mean to have a Christian kingdom? How can we tolerate non-Christian Christian kingdom? I mean, Israel defines itself. So we're the only democracy, in the Middle East. I think that's true in a lot of ways, but they also define this. We are the Jewish state. Yeah. It's on our flag. So how can you be both the Jewish state and a democracy? I mean, does that mean functionally on the ground when bad things come, you don't take threats against non-Jews as seriously as you do against Jews? Or do you grant, political rights to people who will vote against you? And it's a question that kind of haven't fully created a good answer to. So
yeah, well, I'm sure that, I don't know. I feel like since I've been politically conscious, so, ever since I was like 14, the question of what the hell is going to happen, has been at my front of my cortex. And
no, it's been a big issue in American politics. It's like the last, to be honest, it's kind of one of the last, AIPAC, always likes to talk about this is the last bipartisan issue in politics. It's Americans and Democrats all support Israel, and that's pretty much true.
You didn't say Republicans and Democrats. You said Americans and Democrats.
Oh gosh, man, I'm out. It's out, everybody.
Republicans,
cards
and
on the table. Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm still jet lagged. I'm still, I'm still the Israeli water's still going to get out of my system. Republicans and Democrats still kind of both get behind that, and Americans. For whatever reason, are just very fixated. And part of that comes too, I think, from American Protestants, many of whom, I shouldn't say many, but I mean, especially Pentecostals in America, have kind of this obsession with Israel. Like, okay, the creation of the Israeli state is the beginning of the end times. Like, the Jews are returning to Jerusalem, as it talks about in Revelation.
Yeah, well, and that's something that, AIPAC plays into.
Oh, totally,
And I think that one of the wildest things is something that I always was told growing up about the conflict was, these people have been fighting each other for thousands of years. Which if you read anything about the history of the region is silly on its face, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the wounds that are causing this conflict are very recent.
Yes.
Right? On both sides, right? Massacres, riots, that sort of thing that have happened in the 20th century. And that's the sort of thing when people are committing an atrocity of any sort, that's at the front of their mind. That's on their lips, right? It's not, oh man, I can't, they're not thinking about the Second Temple period when they're going about that.
They're not thinking about, they're like, oh, we can say the conflict is, we talk about, how actually big do certain historical episodes loom in people's consciousness vis-a-vis things that have happened within the last 100 years? Because you might say, okay, let's look at, a Holy Land right before or after the Crusades, take your pick, when essentially there's Islamic hegemony. And there was always large populations of Jews still living in the Levant. And as there were, native Christian populations. And they certainly didn't always get along with their Islamic government. Sometimes the government even did very bad things to them. But at the same time, I don't think, maybe I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like those are the conflicts that people are looking to now. What they're looking to now, if you talk to a Palestinian about, what are you upset about something that happened like with the Crusades? No, they're thinking of the Nakba. They're thinking of the disaster. They're thinking of when Israel was created, 1948, and when these lands were taken. Like those are kind of the things. I don't think they're saying. I think it's a kind of rhetorical farce to say, well, that's just kind of this long conflict, and it
allows people to kind of put their hands up and be like, I can't understand it. I can't understand the nuances of the situation because this is just, this is blood related.
Right.
This is people having conflicts that have existed for, again, thousands of years. And it's like, well, okay. First off, Islam is relatively new in comparison. It's not thousands. It's 1,400, 500 years, right? And this 600 what? 600 what was
600, and the 600 is when
600 was 640 something, I think, actually is what it is. But when Islam is founded, so it's not like as old as we like to kind of create an impression.
No, actually, if you're talking about things I've been interested in Israel, I was thinking about Islam actually a lot my time here, and I was interested in talking to Muslims when I was there. And if you actually, because I have a friend at Notre Dame who's studying, he's like comparing the Quran with Syriac homiletic texts and rabbinical homiletic texts, that sort of thing. But like Islam, it's kind of the center gets moved to Arabia, and like the Quran says it's religion of the Arabs. But very, very early Islam, like John Damascene, who works at the court of the Caliph, is like one of the first Christian writers who writes on Islam. So it's like he wasn't ignorant about Islam. Like he worked at a Muslim court. But you look at very early Islam in the Levant, like the Dome of the Rock is one of the oldest buildings in Islam. You read the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, and it almost seems, well, first of all, John Damascene, when he talks about Islam, he doesn't mention the Quran. He doesn't mention any sort of holy text. And you look at the inscriptions of very early Islam, it seems like a very anti-Trinitarian kind of almost permutation of Christianity.
Oh, 100%.
Especially like the Dome of the Rock kind of attests to that, and the way it talks about Jesus on there as well. Like emphasizing he is the Messiah, he's a prophet, but like there is one God. And so, but it's been very touch and go. Like I was kind of looking at the history of scholarship, kind of revisionist scholarship on Islam in the last 20 years, and so much of it is published under pseudonyms. Because people are like, if you're actually looking at the text or you're comparing, well, there actually were different versions of the Quran, or comparing similarities, like Islam very much has its genesis in the Levant, in that area. Like Muslims are right to kind of want to, venerate Jerusalem, because that's kind of where it starts. And then under kind of subsequent caliphates, it gets very much shifted to, as like kind of the importance of Muhammad, everything is codified, it gets shifted towards center more towards Arabia. And Arabia is kind of the holiest lands. But there's very interesting books to be read about Islam and kind of how it existed in its earliest days there in the Holy Land. So
yeah. No, there's much to be read about all of these things.
Everything. Many books to read.
Yeah, I'm curious. Have you because I know that all of the major scholarship around it is in Israel right now. But have you had any conversations with like Kabbalists or any sort of the esoteric orders of Judaism?
It seems like most Jews actually have a fair knowledge. They know what Kabbalah is.
Yeah.
I mean, Kabbalah also means just like received. So you go to a restaurant, you go Kabbalah, 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 and you get the receipt. So I'm oh, this is deep. And so, like I was talking to some people because I wrote a paper last fall regarding like a Renaissance scholar who knew about Kabbalah and was trying to use it insofar as he understood it to talk about like Genesis. When you I think they're very surprised when you find out, you know what Kabbalah is, because I thought about Kabbalah. I met a Druze guy when I was in Israel, and the Druze themselves it's similar to Kabbalah. You know, Kabbalah is influenced by kind of Platonic philosophy, and I was thinking about that when this Druze guy is talking about their long line of prophets, which include Platonic philosophers and mystics and kind of all these different people. But I think it's Sefed is the name of the city. There's 4 holy cities of Judaism. There's Tiberias, Sefed, Hebron, and Jerusalem, which were kind of established in the Middle Ages as being the holy cities of Judaism. Judaism. Sefed is associated with the Kabbalah. Like it became a center of mysticism and studying it there. Like kind of Spanish Jews came there, but I'm not sure how many kind of Kabbalah mystic scholars are hanging out, and maybe they're up at Haifa.
Well, there's a lot of people who study Kabbalah, from what I've heard. But it's not like anybody, I'm sure a minority of those people.
Yeah, what was that anime that like is about incorporates
Kabbalah, Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, or like Evangelion.
Evangelion.
Has kind of elements of Kabbalah. Kabbalah has the cool charts of the Sephirot and all of the processions, but I didn't talk to. There's a guy at Notre Dame who's studying Kabbalah. He's going to Hebrew University this summer to learn modern Hebrew to better understand Kabbalah, and like his advisor's Jewish, and I think there are Israeli scholars who are maybe historians who are doing this sort of stuff. I think he wants to talk to them. So it's interesting stuff.
Yes, certainly. Well, we are actually kind of running out of time. We've almost hit an hour. So we're going to move on to the Patreon. But before we move on to the Patreon, we don't have any questions today because it's a Brain Trust episode. So I want to thank all of our patrons, though, who have signed up for our Patreon at the $25 and higher tier. Actually, it's not. Is it 25?
25? I don't know.
No, $10. Excuse me, not $10.
Is it 20?
All our highest patrons, including...
They make so much money, I just lose count. It's just another thing.
Including Sammy Roberts, Luke Robson, Zach and Amber Strehle, Joe Papalardo, who've all decided to support us at the highest tier. Thank you so much. For everybody else, thank you for as well. If you want to hear more of this discussion, the $5 tier is where you get access to the Patreon. We'd be happy to have you. It's your money that allows us to kind of build out this new studio. Sammy is here now. This is the first time he's recorded in the studio, and I think he's impressed in a certain capacity. It's
good. All I care about is my tool rules sign, having some representation.
The tool rule sign, it has representation, so all $45 of it.
All $45 of Hobby Lobby money.
Yeah, exactly. So that, that Pandora radio subscription for instrumental Christian music is very expensive. They have to charge you quite a bit to get that going. So, well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the Patreon. Thanks, Sammy, for hopping on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for being. Bye.